Welcome back to the Monday Muse. I'm Lee Benson. Original sin is, of course, a theological concept, but does it have a place within psychology? Is scientific psychology fully justified in ignoring original sin? Does original sin have anything to do at all with empirical psychology? Before we begin, remember to like, comment, share, subscribe, and do all the things. Help me to appease the fickle and pernicious algorithm gods. Also, if you have a question and would like to email me, you can email me at basicallyrelatedpodcast@gmail.com, and I will answer it on the podcast. Also, I'd like to hear your thoughts on today's topic, so please let me know what you think about it in the comments on YouTube. So today we're talking about original sin and psychology, the impact of original sin on psychology. Is there any place for original sin in psychology? So to begin with, we want to understand man as he is, real man as he is actually existing in his existential reality. So it's imperative, it's important for us to recognize man as a creature who finds himself in a state that is considerably less than ideal, we could say. Man's current position, man's current condition is a crippled one. And he therefore labors kind of under these burdensome handicaps to strive to become what he is. That we have these ideals and we have these dreams of who we could be, our potential selves, but yet we always seem to be hindered by something in us. There's something existential that keeps us from becoming who we want to be. And of course, this thing, as we know as Christians, is original sin. So it could be argued that original sin is a theological concept, and because psychology deals with empirical science or empirical data, it is quite appropriate that psychology should not concern itself with the issue of original sin. Is psychology fully justified in doing this, though? It is true that we cannot directly establish the facticity of original sin through empirical investigation, but what if we looked indirectly? Science establishes facticity on the high probability of something happening, and this happens also in many ways in an indirect way. That is, by arguing back from causes through the medium of effects. We can take the Big Bang, for example. No one was there to observe the Big Bang. We don't have any eyewitness accounts. However, we can establish the fact of the Big Bang, the cause, when we go through an analysis and do analysis on things that may have caused the Big Bang. While there were no observers of the Big Bang, we can go back, we can trace back from effects to the cause. That we have no eyewitness accounts, as I said, of the cause. We don't have anything of the root itself, but we look at the analysis of the data of the effects and reason back to a cause like the Big Bang. So we can apply the same mode of reasoning to scientific reasoning to establish the facticity of original sin. That the basic pattern of the argument is something like this. All around us, throughout the course of human history and throughout our individual lives, we observe these deeply troubling behaviors of humans, irrational behaviors, maladaptive behaviors, very violent behaviors. And on this basis of the data, on the basis that everyone from your individual self to the course of human history, we see that there's something wrong. And we kind of have something analogous to. We have the effects of the Big Bang. We might call it the Big Fall, which is the reasonable kind of causal explanation of the data. That some people say that if original sin were not a fact, we'd have to invent it to explain people's bad behaviors. So we have the effects. We have the bad behaviors of people and of humans throughout time and in our own lives. And then we can maybe reason back to the cause. So the effects of the original sin are everywhere. They're all around us. They are in ourselves. Humans can be kind of beset by this constant and chronic malaise, which inhibits them from acting consistently according to what they know to be right or the dictates of their conscience or natural law. So from a psychological point of view, perhaps the strongest piece of evidence is the profound discrepancy of which we all seem to be conscious of. This discrepancy between how things actually are and the way things ought to be. That wherever man lives, in whatever time he lives, that there's this contradiction that we experience that my life and existence is not how it should be. There's something radically wrong with the human condition. I think sometimes this is most especially seen in death, that there's kind of a naturalness to grief and death, that, when someone's taken from us by any means, any number of means, we're sad naturally because we don't have that person physically in our lives anymore. But there's also this deep sense that death is somehow unnatural, that it doesn't seem to belong in human existence. And we feel this on a deep existential level, like I said, on a spiritual level. So the reality of the implications of original sin can perhaps, I think, most fruitfully be applied to our individual lives. That we can think of our composite nature, body and soul. We can think of the psychology of St. Paul. He talks about or uses the imagery of warfare, of the internal struggle between body and soul. And that's our present psychological point of view, is of fallen man. Not man as he is supposed to be, not man as he was in the garden, but man as he is now, fallen. So the results of original sin are this tension. And this tension has to be acknowledged by psychology. The denial of original sin and its effects on the individual seem very impractical. And it's impractical because it leaves the individual vulnerable, in a vulnerable spot. We should look at original sin and take it seriously. This is even what Carl Jung said, that there's a great practical nature to understanding original sin, and applying it is we will never have too high of an opinion of ourselves. We'll never esteem our morality as too high, that there's always some sin that we are willing to commit, even if we think we aren't, that given the right circumstances we might, that we can never say, I am above any other sin. Original sin, the doctrine of original sin as applied to or connected to psychology, is a very sober idea, that we should look at the existential struggle of man and take it seriously and understand that there's something deeply and fundamentally wrong with existence. We all know it, and there's no reason to explain it away or to say that it doesn't exist. I think perhaps there might be some sort of reductionist interpretations of original sin as applies to psychology. But, as Jung would say for that it's not very satisfying to say that our corrupted desires or our existential frustration is reduced to simply this or that complex, or just an issue with your mother or an issue with your father. It's not satisfying. It's not existentially satisfying. We need to look at these problems and say, what is the meaning behind it, as opposed to its reductionist explanation. So to acknowledge original sin, the fact of original sin, is eminently realistic and therefore good for psychology. To consciously admit the fact that one is ill is a necessary first step towards a cure. For it is only then, when one kind of makes this first admission, that one sees the need for remedies, that one seeks out these remedies. Interestingly, there's kind of a debate, I think probably still going on, but it was big in medieval Europe, that could pagans and people prior to Christ understand sin? Did they have a concept of what it means to sin against God, or of original sin? And people like Kierkegaard and Saint Bonaventure say no, that the pagan does not know original sin. However, if we look at different myths, of the Greeks and the Romans and all throughout history. I think of Plato's Symposium. There's some primordial sin that humanity inherits in one way or another. There's some great offense against the gods that now explains the present human condition. So if we take myth to mean not just a made-up story about things, but rather kind of more in a Jungian sense that we're looking at reality, and we're using fantasy to help us interact with reality. For Jung, fantasy was actually the kind of the root, the base of how the human psyche works and how the human psyche interacts with the world. So humans are looking around, humans are messed up, they're doing messed up things to each other and to really all of creation around them, and they can't seem to stop. And the ancient world is creating myths behind this to understand why is it that man is like this. And he's like this because of some primordial sin, some primordial issue. He, like I said, he stole the fire from the gods. The humans made too much noise and ticked off the gods. Whatever it is, there is a punishment at the core of our existence. And original sin is the full revelation of that these pagan myths were sort of correct. Perhaps some of the details were wrong, but the meta story was right. That humans are fundamentally flawed because of a primordial sin against God. Again, the details need to be worked out. But then we have revelation that comes, especially the fullness of revelation in Christ. And then here we learn that this is what's wrong with humanity. And again, going back to the benefit of consciously acknowledging this, that we should consciously see this, or we should be open and honest about this problem in our psychology. And in fact, it's not a theological impingement or a theological encroachment upon a philosophical field or a scientific field. It's actually just a bare recognition that this is the condition of humans, and to say otherwise and to come up with some reductionist, materialist explanation is not helpful psychologically. It's not healthy psychologically. We should take man as he is. Of course, we should encourage people to be more than they are. That's most especially a core fundamental tenet of Christianity, is that you are to be more than what you presently are. We shouldn't to take the reality, the existential reality of man at face value, or to take that as our conscious starting point, is not to say that we keep man there, that we say, oh, you're a fallen man and you should stay fallen man, but that we recognize that these sinful behaviors and patterns are not something that can be explained away, but are ingrained in human nature, and then from there move towards some sort of ideal. But that ideal is never easily accomplished. And that's part of original sin, is that we have to labor greatly. We have to labor with a lot of effort in order to achieve any sort of harmony within ourselves and within kind of the community around us, or creation even around us. That there is some sort of disharmony in us. But I think especially the Christian advantage is the idea of grace, that grace can perfect fallen nature. That we are supposed to move away from, we are supposed to, in some sense, I should say, bridge the how things actually are and how they ought to be. Christ is still calling us towards how things ought to be. As he says, you are to be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect, that there's a continual striving towards improvement, but all the while, starting point, and all the while until we are, until we die and we're in union with God, in that period from life to death, we should recognize the propensity, the inclination to fall away. And that our starting point is that man is in disharmony with himself, with God, and in fact with all of creation. That's just a sober starting point, I believe, for psychology. So that's where I'm going to end today. Let me know what you think in the comments below. And if you have any questions, you can email me at basicallyrelatedpodcast@gmail.com. I will see you next week.